Thank you for joining us on the Going Deeper podcast, a ministry of Fathom Church in Littleton, Colorado. You will never get to the bottom of the depths that are in Christ for you. And our hope with this podcast is that it will help you go deeper with God. So let's dive into this episode of the Going Deeper podcast. What's up, everyone? This is your host, Kyle Knight.
What's up?
I'm leaving that in. And welcome to the Going Deeper podcast, a podcast where we have conversations to hopefully help you go deeper in your relationship with God. And we're excited to be here in the podcast studio with our very own missions minister, Karina Bost. Hello, Karina.
Hello. And now my heart's like pumping because that genuinely startled me.
And Chris Martin's here, our lead pastor, obviously.
Buenos dias.
Hello, Chris. Chris, you're really excited today.
Oh, gosh. Like I mean, I felt like I needed to do that just to kind of get me woken up as much as I need to wake you guys up. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
So everybody, that was an exciting start to our podcast.
Yeah, appreciated. So as you can see by the title of this episode, we're going to be talking about PKs. And for those of you that don't know what or who a PK is, it is a pastor's kid. So we're going to be talking about pastor's kids, kind of what it's like being pastors' kids, maybe some advice we have in maybe raising our own kids as pastors' kids, and then really just what that kind of looks like in the church. And so I guess where we can start, we have a pastor's kid right here at the table with us. That's with us every single week, and that's Karina Bost. Hey, Karina, why don't you just kind of inform us on what it was like being a pastor's kid. I mean, you can go as deep as you want, maybe some positives, and if there were any negatives.
Not a negative at all.
Not negative, not one.
I had the perfect childhood.
Yeah.
But
we should call your dad. Let's just.
That's right. We'll zoom him in from Thailand. But yeah, let us know, like, what was it like being a PK?
Yeah, I think first, it is kind of cool, like your dad's the pastor. And this is probably when I was younger. There's this sense of like, not celebrity status, but it's like, oh, everyone knows my dad. That's kind of fun. But then alternatively, everyone knows you as well. And that became less cool the older I got. And that's for multiple reasons. People in the church felt like they could just say anything. I mean, I literally had someone tell me once, make sure you behave because your attitude reflects your father and you don't want to make your dad's name look bad. And I was pretty young, and that's a lot of pressure to put on a kid. Right. I mean, that wasn't an isolated situation. People feel like they could just tell me whatever because I was a pastor's kid. I don't know where that came in or why people thought that was okay, but people were always telling me and my siblings things. So it's just an interesting dynamic. But I think the older I got, the more I realized it's kind of a lonely position. For me personally, I always felt like, this was my experience, I always felt like no one wanted to really be my friend because there's this, I don't know if it was this concept of like, well, she's the pastor's kid. Anything we do with her is going to get back to the pastor. Or if it was just, oh, maybe she's too goody or whatever to be with us and hang out and do whatever we're doing. For whatever reason it was, in my particular situation, I found it to be very lonely. I didn't have close friends. I didn't have people that I felt like I could just have meaningful conversation with, or even just artificial conversation with to most extent. So that was another piece of it. And I think the biggest piece of it was just realizing that I shared my dad with everyone. You know, as a kid, you just want your dad to be your dad. You want him to be there. And I think as a kid, you just have that jealousy and you're like, well, what about me? I think as I grew up, I realized the example of a true disciple maker that my dad was. And so I kind of appreciate that now. Like my dad always said, God is more important to me than anything. And you see that. But as a kid, it doesn't feel so great to know, like, hey, my dad loves God most. And then you're like, what about me? So it's like all in the right place. But I think as a kid, you just don't interpret it well. But also, I think pastors' kids do share their time more so than most people. when someone's ill, when someone has passed away, when there's problems, the pastor has to go. And so there were many evenings that my dad wasn't there. And so, I think that's just a piece you grow up with as a pastor's kid. So there you go. That's just some pieces.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I'd like to tender my resignation. Is that what I'm allowed to do now?
yeah, totally.
No, but that's helpful.
Yeah.
It's so helpful.
It is. And actually that was really helpful for me to hear as I'm raising 2 kids. And I'm a pastor. So that's good things to think about. I guess if we're sharing our own experiences, I'm technically not a pastor's kid, but my mom was on staff at our church, and all growing up. And so I had that at least close connection with church and having my mom be on staff. And so it was definitely different. I think a lot of those things, Karina, that you said, I can kind of relate to, not so much of the, my mom had to go somewhere at the drop of a hat, that kind of stuff, that her availability was really all with us. But some of the things that I remember growing up in at least being the kid of someone who was on staff, and she was one of the pastoral assistants, and she had many roles throughout my growing up, was that everybody in the church knew me. And I didn't necessarily know everybody in the church. It was a pretty large church back home, and it was like that was a good thing, but that brought obviously a lot of pressure and a lot of just like maybe little bits of anxiety here and there of like, Karina, kind of like what you said, like, oh, am I, everybody knows me because everybody knows my mom, and like, am I acting right here at church because I'm, I don't want to get my mom in trouble. I want everybody to see me as like, I'm the good, church kid growing up because my mom's on staff. And that just brought a lot of pressures of like, those expectations on me being like, my mom's on staff at a church that we attend. And that was most of my, friends and family went to that church. And so I had this expectation on me of like, oh, then I need to be like, I need to be that perfect, kid in kids ministry, that perfect youth in youth ministry, because my mom is on staff. And as much as like I liked some of the a little bit of people knowing me, it just came with a lot of pressure and a lot of just you kind of had to be. You kind of felt like at a young age you had to be on going to church every single week because you were kind of under a microscope a little bit, and you couldn't like fall into the background a little bit like maybe some other students or some other kids or whatever. But Karina, one of the things you said is looking at your dad as that example of discipleship, of like his relationship with God. That was huge for me with my mom, and still is. Like, she is really the one I look up to the most with her relationship with God, and just how she has just continued to put God first in her life. I grew up watching her in her disciplines of like reading the Bible every single day, having it out for us to see, and it just like marked up like crazy. And just her putting God first, as well as her job at our church. It's like that I got to see. And that was like, just still is like one of my proudest things of like seeing my mom in that. And I get to, I get to say like, hey, and I got to say like, hey, that's my mom. My mom, really is and was that example for me, for sure. Like growing up in the church.
Wow.
I'm looking at you now.
You can look at me. Well, that's, I'm not talking a whole lot because I wasn't raised in the church, let alone with a parent who was either employed by the church or the pastor of the church. But it's helpful to hear those things because I am raising a PK. Okay. And even some of the things that you guys have already said, like we've already seen. We've already seen with Harper that, everybody knows her, and they know her because I tell stories about her. which I'm gonna have to stop doing, just so you know, because she is not so pleased that I'm sharing stories. Like as she gets older, it's just different, right? Like there's a statute of limitations that I can use those old stories, but when she's 10, 11, 12 years old, I can't be telling you everything that's going on in our house.
Yeah, I had 3 sisters, so my dad could say my daughter,
Oh,
and they
there
would
you
go,
go.
"Oh, I wonder which one."
oh,
but
which
it was a
one?
little bit more
That's so
vague.
good.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
so
when you
good.
say
I'm
when
in
you
trouble.
say my daughter,
I've got
it's
no,
like,
I got no
right.
other help. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I
Yeah.
think that's really helpful to think through those things. I did have a mentor when I first got into pastoral ministry before I had kids. So I was early married. First started. Actually, I think I was working at the church that I met you at, Kyle. And he just gave me this advice. He said, when you have kids, if you're in ministry, let them be kids.
Mhm.
Just let them be, like, no other expectation. Like, so Karina, to your point, like the messaging of like what you do reflects on your, no. Like, no, you get to be the kid who gets to run crazy through the halls just like every other kid, and who gets spanked just like every other kid, and who, like there's discipline involved like every other kid, and you get to, like I remember early when Harper was maybe 2 or 3. I've told the story in a sermon. I was trying to shoot a bunny in my backyard with a pellet gun, and I missed, and I said a word that I shouldn't have said. I said an explicit word,
Pastor.
and I said, "Bleep, bunny." I was very, I was like, "Oh, that's that darn bunny," but I said the bad word. Okay, I said a bad word. And Harper standing right next to me. I didn't realize because she was tiny. Like I didn't realize. And she said in her sweetest little voice, "Darn bunny," but said the word. And I was like, oh no, like the pastor's kid. She's going to go to Sunday school on Sunday and start saying that word. And everyone's gonna be like, okay, great. Our whole, kids ministry now is swearing because of the pastor's kid. But like, I think it was a helpful piece of advice is just, hey, let your kid be a kid.
Yeah, I mean that's the truth, because and I appreciate that wisdom, because every person has a spiritual journey, and you're born in the church, and then you're born under the pressure of your dad being the pastor, and it's like you're robbed the opportunity of your own spiritual journey because there are just so many expectations of other people, and so giving your kid the freedom as a pastor to just be a kid and then grow in, they still know, they hear the Bible stories, they know, and they know the gospel presentation, they know all these things, but there's already enough pressure. And even if, it's like you can do what you can do to alleviate that, but to some extent,
it's just how it is. Yeah.
Going to be there.
Hey, talk to me a little bit more, Karina, about friendships as a pastor's kid, because I think for Kyle and I, especially, your kids are older. And so they're already kind of leveled out of some of that awkwardness, but like our kids are little still. And so talk to us about like friendships with other families, with other children. Like, her friends are essentially our friends right now.
Yeah.
But we've already experienced this where it's like close people to us at the church all of a sudden are gone, whether they move or whether they leave. And then all of a sudden Harper's friends are gone too. So talk to us about the dynamics of that a little bit.
Yeah. So this is another disadvantage of growing up in a small town. It was not just that the people in our church, but it was like the whole town knew. So there was just this interesting element of always being the pastor's kid carrying, weight. But there is this reality that you are close to who your parents are close to, especially as a small kid. But when your parents are, pastors, ministry, when it comes to theological issues and people leave the church, or just even disagreements about carpet color, then it becomes this strain in your relationship with your friends. It's just like all of a sudden, as a kid, you had a friend and now you never see them again. Right. And it's not usually like, as the pastor, it's not usually anything, you're sticking to your theology and you're trying to be true to the Bible, but people come into the church and have weird ideas about carpet color. Yeah. And all of a sudden, you had a really good friend and then you never hear from them again. So it is weird. Yeah. It's sad. I think just even just Harper being in a Christian school and her friends knowing, it's probably not so much now, but when she's in high school, this reality, not all Christian kids in Christian schools, not all Christian not all kids in Christian schools are Christians. And so there will just be this natural wall. It's like, we don't want her to know what we're doing because what we're doing isn't good.
Right.
Which I don't know. That might not be,
okay, but yeah.
That might not be the experience, but it could be, you know,
interesting.
I would imagine for some kids it will happen.
Yeah.
And which maybe, you know, it's like, those are not the kids you want Harper hanging out with anyways.
Right.
But you just feel it. You just always feel like this isolation, not from everybody. I felt it from more people probably because of my specific situation in a very small town.
Right.
Yeah. So you lose friends really quickly as a kid for reasons you don't even know.
Yeah. They're out of your control.
And, and yeah, it feels kind of transient and fluid. And it's weird.
Right. It's almost, I would imagine it's not the exact same, but you talk to families in the military who move around a lot. And I wonder if there's some of that where it's like, you're my friend right now, but what about next year? You know, and I just wonder if some of that is kind of just ingrained in the experience. Kyle, what about you? I mean, in terms of like friendships, I mean, growing up at the church all the time, doing the staff stuff, like how did that affect friendships?
I think where I was coming from, not having my mom as one of the pastors on staff, my friendships were pretty normal.
Okay.
Now growing up like that, this part of my testimony is like, I had like two separate friends. I had my school friends and my church friends, and very rarely did those mix. And so I spent most of my time with my church friends. So they knew my mom, they knew like who she was in the church and everything like that. And yeah, so I felt like with my friends, I didn't have that pressure of like, oh, my mom's a pastor. She was on staff. And so it didn't really come with any like special pressure with my friends or like we would hang out and it would never be like oh, well, your mom's gonna know this, therefore even like, oh, she might tell our youth pastor this or something like that. So it wasn't really I mean luckily, I mean, I think that was good. I think it was good for that to kind of be separate from my friendships growing up. And I think what I can remember being a kid in the church, not necessarily the friends that I have. I think it was just more pressure from just other adults seeing me in the church pretty much. But yeah, friendship wise, I think I had a pretty quote unquote normal Christian church friendships without that kind of big pressure.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay. So this is an interesting conversation for us. I'm imagining that our church are listening. They're like, okay, that's nice, but what does that have to do with us? Like, we don't have kids. We're not working at the church. So you've got teens, okay, in our church. Kyle and I, we have elementary and younger children in our church. Let's talk to our church members about advice, how they can serve us. I mean, this might be a little self-serving, but I think it's probably important. I mean, a healthy pastor, a healthy staff, a healthy family. I mean, these things actually lead to health in your church as well. So how would we coach our church members when they're engaging with our children? Even let's talk, I mean, it might even be, let's talk children, but even our families in general, friendships, when they see a child in the hallway, they see Austin, they see Harper, they see Jordan, they see Peyton, they see some of our kids, and maybe they've known something or they heard something on a podcast or whatever the venue is, they know more about them than that kid knows that they know about them. How would we want them to love our kids, serve our kids, treat our kids here at Fathom?
Yeah, I think point of application for me is, yes, you know all the pastor's kids and all the staff kids because we put them before you, and they just comes with the job. But I think when I was a kid, it was so overwhelming. And so don't just assume because they're the pastor's kids that it is appropriate for you to have a relationship with them. Kids naturally will have relationships in the church. Like if you're in children's ministry or youth ministry, or if you are in a small group with staff kids, or those places, natural relationships are established. But just like you go into a church and there's a lot of people, it's overwhelming. It's even more so for a kid. And then you throw on this expectation that they should know everybody. So just be like thoughtful that, you know, these are just kids. They're little, they're just, they're aware that you know them, but they're not necessarily comfortable that everyone knows them. So just be really aware of that. And, you know, you can say hi. I mean, some of these kids that we're talking about are shyer than others, but I would imagine you can still say hi, friendly. But if it seems like conversation is not going to come, you know, don't force something. My kids are older and I think, you know, they're learning to kind of establish themselves in the church. So the relationship piece is a little bit different, but it's like, if it was your own kids, what kind of engagement would you want another adult having with them? And that's just really, I think, a piece that if you keep that in your mind, it makes more sense. Like, hey, if this was my kid, what kind of conversation would I expect another adult to have with them? Because at the end of the day, they're just kids.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. And I think a little bit along those lines, they're just kids. I would love the church to treat my kids like any other kids that come through these doors. And I'll get to what I've seen from our church already, but yeah, my hope would be that my kids don't get special privileges in the classrooms, that they're more than other kids, that it's like, oh, there's Pastor Kyle's kid. Let's give him an extra snack or something like that. Or let's show him. That's silly, but like showing him, even just her, showing them more attention, more love, more grace, more all this other kind of stuff. I want my kids to be a part of this church as well and not be like put on a pedestal or anything like that. Like they don't need, I know like pastors and staff, like kind of in the spotlight. A lot of the times I don't need my kids in the spotlight right now, as much as they are. Chris, you said like will be examples and sermons and our church will know stories and those sorts of things about my kids. But I would just love the church to treat my kids like all the other kids at Fathom equally. And I want to bring up that I've seen that happen already here at Fathom, that they are, they're loved just like all the other kids. They're not like, I haven't seen the like special privileges given to my own kids. And I've seen them loved along with every other kid that walks through these doors and youth. That's awesome. That's what I want to see. I want to see, no matter if they're pastors' kids or staff members' kids or whatever, that the young people will all just be loved. And so that's my advice would be, you know, just keep treating my kids like other kids that come through these doors, love them. And then I guess another thing would be, I guess it would be like just give, and again, this goes along with everybody else. So I guess it's not really a special thing for me, but just give my kids grace along with me as a parent. I think this is more like a parenting thing for me and my wife, as we are at church, giving us grace in trying to parent our kids as well as being at church. It's hard. It's difficult. My wife, we say this, like, our spouse is she's like a single mom on Sunday mornings, pretty much, because she's got to get the kids ready. She gets them here and everything like that. And usually when I'm here doing things and my kids are running crazy through the hallways, she's the one that's kind of got to rope them in, get them all their stuff out the door and everything like that. And so we would just love grace every single, again, we get it all the time, which is amazing. We just love our church. And so I guess those are the only things that are popping into my head. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, I'll throw one more out there because I agree with you guys on both of those. I would also say, so the mission of Fathom Kids and of Fathom Youth is that our next gen ministries exist to partner with parents to disciple kids and youth. Like that's what we say. We want to partner with you to disciple your kids, to disciple your youth. And that's true for us on staff as well. So all the statistics point to a secondary Christ-centered meaningful adult relationship is as important in the spiritual development of a teenager, of a child, as their parents' relationship with them in Christ. Like a marker of kids who stay in the faith, who stay Christian after they graduate, is whether or not they had someone else besides their parents modeling Christ to them. And so I would say, partner with us, right? Like, don't assume that just because my girl's the pastor's kid that we've got this thing nailed when it comes to disciple making. I want her to be a disciple of Jesus. We're doing the things that we should be doing. We're taking it home every week. Kyle sends us those things and we're doing the things at dinner table. And like, I want other women in our church to love her, like to shepherd her, to walk with her. Yeah. I know Karina is so thankful to have Kyle in our youth ministry that they're, you're walking with the boys. I mean, I know Kevin's thankful for that because as much as parents can do this, we can't do it by ourselves. And so that is piggybacking on what you said, Kyle, because it is like, treat them like everybody else, but like, hey, don't assume just because they're PKs or they're staff kids that they just like got it all locked up. Like they're gonna wrestle, they're gonna struggle, they're gonna need somebody to come to their games, they're gonna need somebody to to be that other adult who's Christ-centered, who's gonna model Jesus to them over their childhood into adolescence. So so yeah, I think there's plenty more probably we could talk about on this, but I just think that's I do agree with you, Kyle. I think our church does a pretty good job of this. And I'm encouraged, Karina, that you are maybe a statistic, but a good statistic, because we hear horror stories of PKs too. And listen, that's not just to pastors' kids; it's to any kid raised in the church. You cannot, assure that your kid's going to be a Christian, that your kid's going to be okay. But you can do the best you can. And that's what we're trying to do as staff members of this church too.
Yeah, it's a hard position to be in. And I think there is statistics because kids can grow up and be resentful. And I think being really intentional and thinking through and having conversation like this and just, that constant source of prayer. And that's another application piece people can do. Like, you can pray for us as parents, pray for us as witness to our children, pray, for like disciple making in the church for not just the pastor's kids, but all the kids that grow up in the church.
Pray for good friends, good friendships. I mean, gosh, look at your friends, you'll look at your future, right? And I want all of the kids at Fathom Church to have good friendships here in the church that are deep, not just the PKs, but all of them. Yeah. So gosh, please be praying for the families and the kids at our church.
Yeah. That's a good word. That's a good place to kind of wrap this up. Thank you guys for this conversation on pastors' kids, and thank you, church, for listening, and we'll catch you next time.